Okay, so back when I was doing a video on how I used a standard negative and translated, I had mentioned that you could organize this in a spreadsheet, and after I said that, I thought I should do that, and it turns out that it worked really well for me. And because it worked so well for me, I wanted to share that with you. And I know that it seems really technical what I had said in that lesson, but it saved me so much time and so much material since then that I just thought I would put it out there and make it available for you guys. So what I did was I set up a spreadsheet that works really well, and it's easy for me to share that with you. So if you want it, you email me and I can simply attach it to an email and you'll have it. My email is timhguitar, since I play guitar, at gmail.com. So that's how you can contact me if you want a copy of the spreadsheet. It's real simple. But going back, I want to explain how translation works. And I initially did it in the 80s, 1980s, for color. And we would establish a balance for every darkroom every week with a common emulsion. And in color, you're dealing with density and color. So whether you're using 30 yellow or 40 yellow and 50 magenta with a specific amount of exposure, we would normalize that and standard it, make a standard in every darkroom. And then when I switched to a different emulsion or a different negative, I could simply translate to that room, to that different room, noting the deviation in the standard exposure. It sounds more complicated than it is, but establishing a common denominator in your darkroom helps you do this. Now, it turns out that I did that manually, but it's very clumsy when you do it manually. So what I did was I printed a test on this paper, which is my RC paper. It's just the Ilford multi-grade. And using a specific filtration, I got the contrast that I wanted for a particular image. And that might take me 4 tests. And I'll burn here and I'll dodge here and so forth. But I wind up with a good exposure for that, and it's just a 5x7. Well, when I go into this paper, which is more than double the cost of that paper, fiber-based paper, I'm now making a large print. And if I was to make 4 or 5 tests on large paper, it's going to cost quite a bit more than just doing a 5x7 on this paper. So with the final exposure that I used for this paper, I translate it onto this paper, and then I make a strip test, and because of the previous information, it saves me a lot of time and materials, especially since I'm only making a small print here. So in order to do that, I have to say, okay, I use 30 magenta, so I'm not going to find something that's close to 30 magenta. And here's 25. So I take this strip, okay, and then I go to this strip and find one that looks like this, where the black starts to appear at the same place. And I find, oh, this one needs 40 magenta or whatever. And then I notice that, oh, this took 19 seconds and this took 30 seconds or whatever. So the difference between the filter pack and the exposure gave me my starting point to get to, well, it was very clumsy. And I did that on camera. And I had mentioned, well, you could do this on a spreadsheet. So that's what I did. I put it on a spreadsheet. Now, you need a standard negative. This is my standard negative. Now, I made this, and I made it from evaluating this step tab that you can buy. You can get a standard. Well, this is an enlarged one. Okay, so normally they're smaller than that. They're only this large, but I enlarged this for the video lesson. This step tablet covers 21 steps of half stops, so it's over 3.0. The density range, 0.15 being half a stop. So 10 stops would be 3.0. You've got 21 steps, so, and it's very abrupt. You can see that you're not using the whole grayscale. You only see about 9 of these steps here, 7 easily, but you know, and so I figured I'll make my own that is more gradual, still 21 steps, but then when I contact print it onto black and white paper, I will be able to see all 21 steps. So this negative covers 1.65 or thereabouts. I wasn't able to consistently make them all exactly 1.65, but every time I would test my processing, I would try to maintain 1.65 from pure black to pure white. And I use a standard negative exposure to do that as well. So I do have a few of these, and it would really help if you had one. So for a short while at least, I can offer you one of these. And I sent about a dozen of these out to others that took me up on my offer of ordering some small fine prints, reference prints, worldwide actually. Only maybe 3 of them were sent to this country. Most of them went outside of the country. People were interested in. And so I sent them that. So some of you already have this. And what I do is under glass, you just contact it onto paper. Okay? And what you want to do is you want to make this very near to white. This being white, this should be within 0.01, no more than 0.02 away from this. And then the next step, you can just begin to see. And the filtration you use, the filter that you use, you should try to get all 21 visible to your eye. I can see the difference between this and that. And that would be the softest grade that I would probably ever print with. In terms of filtration, since I'm using a dichroic color head, I can dial in the amount of yellow that I want to use. If you're using the multi-grade filters or the Kodak poly contrast filters, you're going to be using a number 1 filter or a number 0 filter, and putting that in front of your lens and then contacting this negative onto paper. Now you don't have to use this negative, you can make your own, but you want to use something that's going to be kept in your darkroom as your standard neg. Now you also do need some kind of light level adjustment. So this is what I have, and again, we designed this. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a readout. You press this button and it goes on for like, I don't know, 35 seconds, 40 seconds. And the amount of light falling on here gives you a digital readout. So you turn your aperture ring until the light falling on the sensor gives you a consistent readout. Now, it has to be, the darkroom has to be totally dark. This will see a safe light, so even the safe lights have to be on. The enlarger should be down so there's no light spill. And assuming that you've got the filter pack in the head, you then adjust your aperture until you get 2.20 or whatever value you want. And that's your standard. So if you dial in 30 more magenta, you're going to have to change your aperture until you get 2.20. And that's where the consistency for the exposure comes from. So you need both these things or something like it. We made these. We had this design and we supplied this with our software in the 1980s. So I do have some of these, but commercially you can buy stuff like this. This is not so easy. You can buy the one that covers 3.15 commercially, but if you want something that's 1.65 like what I have, you'd have to email me. If you send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, then I'll stick one in and mail it to you. I don't know how that's going to work if you're overseas though. You put stamps from Venezuela. I don't think the U.S. Post Office is going to accept that as postage, but I'm not going to worry about that. But anyway, I do have some of these. I have some of these, but this, well, you can find commercially. But but remember, it has to be totally dark in order for it to work. So, having said all that, this particular paper, the Kodak multigrade, in order to see all steps and the black starts to appear here, I used 50 yellow. Okay, then I made the next one with I went to 35 yellow, and again I just look for this step to just begin to come out, and I stop, and then the blacks appear sooner. And because there's only 15 yellow difference, it's a minute change. 15 yellow, I go to 20 yellow, and as I do, you can see it begins to get, the black starts to creep up here, and next one will be 5, and so forth and so on, until I get up to 160 magenta here. So from yellow, I'll go down to 0 yellow, and I'll start adding magenta. 5 points, 5 points, 5 points, and I get a whole bunch of these. It takes a while, but it's very informative. It's a really good thing to do, and once you do it, you're done. Okay. I do the same thing with the multi-grade fiber. Now this one, in order to see this step all the way down here without a densitometer, I'm just doing it by eye. This is 80 yellow. So 80 yellow is equal to 50 here. Okay, so this paper required 50, this one took 80. So obviously from 80, now I'm going to 65 and so forth. And again, I go all the way to 100. This one only went to 130. Beyond 100, there wasn't, see, you stop because no matter what you do, you don't get any more contrast. Okay, so I stopped at 130 for this paper, but for this paper I stopped at 160. So this actually got more contrasty than this. At least for this emulsion. Okay, this is the RC paper. Gave me more contrast than the fiber paper. But I'm, you know, my negatives don't never require this much filtration anyway, so it doesn't bother me. Now this happens to be the FOMA paper. The FOMA paper is very different. This is only 10 yellow in order to see all that. So the equivalent exposure, going from my test print, my test 5x7 print on RC paper, going to FOMA would be vastly different than if I printed onto the Ilford fiber paper. And that's mainly because the FOMA paper is strictly an orthochromatic paper, which means you cannot use amber light, amber safe light. So obviously this paper is more sensitive to, because it's sensitive to a wider spectrum of light. And so a little bit of yellow will be seen by this paper. So if I was to be happy with the print I made on this paper and then I decide to print on this paper, it's so different that it might take me 4 tests on this. And this paper is really expensive in the country, in the United States. It's actually more expensive than the Ilford fiber paper. Okay? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now with this data, I then have to lay them out and just visually looking at it, see where that mid-tone, where this starts to move. And so I compare it to this paper and I lay it out and I line it up as best as I can so that I know that 30 magenta here equals 40 magenta there, or whatever. After I do that, I plug it into my spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet. And so I just type, this is, you can see that 50 yellow required 2.2 light level, that's all the same. 25 seconds. On the Ilford fiber paper, it was equal to the 80 yellow, 2.2, and this took 33 seconds, whereas that took 25 seconds. And I just plugged this in. So you can see that 55 magenta equals 55 magenta. So it catches up here. And that's based on the testing of, the papers. And again, you have to do this diligently. You don't want to rush it. The temperature, the chemistry should be fresh for both. It's just 1 to 2 dilution. I used 70 degrees as the temperature of my developer. And I have a heater, so I can turn that heater on and off to maintain the temperature. It doesn't have to be exactly 70, but it should be pretty close. You don't want it to drop down to 65 degrees for one test. And as you're going on, by the time you get here, your temperature fluctuates. But once you do this, you have it. Now, when I get a new batch of paper, I actually do this again. I may not do all of them, but I'll do the standard, my normal, which is probably around 10 magenta or something. And I'll see if it matches. If it doesn't, then I have to make adjustments, because even though Ilford's a good company, I don't know their quality control is that tight. And we did this all the time with Kodak papers and Fuji papers and Agfa papers. Every time you get a new emulsion, you would have to test it anyway. You'd see. And you can also see if the contrast is the same. I'm going to show you the spreadsheet now. But again, you need to maintain a light level. And do it under glass with good contact so you don't get any flare. Okay? Oh, another thing I should mention. Most of my negs I contact. After I process it, I'll make a contact. And I'll zero in during the contacting. But when I do this test, I always project a 5 by 7, and the projection is important because when you contact, there's no flare in the exposure. When you make an enlarged print, even if it's only a 5 by 7, that the bellows, the lens between the bellows and the egg, light will bounce around in there and cause flare. And if your negative is such that you have a lot of clear areas, like a black background, you're going to get a lot of flare. So your contact might require, 10 magenta, but the print will need 35 magenta in order to offset that flare. So it's important that you project your final 5 by 7 test, and don't rely on a contact, because the contact again has no flare. Okay, because obviously when you enlarge, you're going to be enlarging, so you want to enlarge your test too. Okay, I printed this out. Okay, I'll explain it before I show you the spreadsheet. What you do is you type in the exposure that you used for your test, your final 5 by 7. This one was 15 magenta, 2.2, and 19.5 seconds. This is 15 magenta. So I look down here until I find 15 magenta. 15 magenta is M18. So here I just type in M18. That's my reference. And it'll refer to this and find that, 15 magenta is equal to 5 magenta on this paper. So it'll recommend 5 magenta. It knows that the 15, M18 here, was 18 seconds. This one was 12.8 seconds. The difference is calculated. There's a factor of 1.8 in this case. So it says when you go on to this paper, fiber paper, use 5 magenta at 13.8 seconds with the same light level. That's another thing. In the previous video where I showed you how to translate, I simply put the f-stop set on F11, and I lower the enlarger or raise the enlarger until I get 2.2. Once it reads 2.2 at a locked f-stop, I then open one stop to F8 and I see what it reads. And then I open another stop and see what it reads. So I write this down so that I know that if I used F11 at 10 seconds, when I go to F8, I'm going to use 5 seconds. Because it's brighter by one stop, so I cut my exposure in half. So in this way, I know my deviation from 2.2. So I know that one stop brighter than 2.2 might be 2.58. One stop brighter than that might go to 2.78 or 2.83 or whatever the unit says. I write that down so that when I make my enlargement, I may not be able to achieve 2.2 because I'm making them 20 by 24. So I compensate by using the appropriate light level, and then I double my time accordingly. It works really well. Before I go to the software, I just show you a couple of things. Now I normally throw all this away, but I saved it. No more than 2 tests. When I get a recommendation, like if I get 13.8, and I wind up using 27.6 because I can't get 2.2, so I'm closing down. I had to double my time because I'm using one stop smaller than 2.2. When I get that magic exposure, like 38 seconds or whatever, I'll make a test with 35 seconds, 34 seconds. So instead of using 38, I'll use 34. And then I'll cover the paper and give 4 more seconds, cover the paper and give 4 more seconds. So I'm going a little less than what's recommended. I'm giving maybe just 10-15% more. And so I do use 38, but I also go a little bit less than 38, a little bit more than 38, and I'll get a strip, and then I'll make this test. So this is my second test. So with 2 tests, I've already got my exposure. That, and I also microwave this. So after I make the test, I'll put in this microwave here, and I'll zap it for 1 minute and 20 seconds, and then it'll be dry. And I can look at the dry down because the density changes a little bit when it dries. I learned that from Ansel Adams. He used a microwave. And then with 2 strip tests, now I can make a full 20 by 24. The 5x7 also tells me, oh, this corner had to be burned a little bit or whatever. So whatever you know from making the final small print, you can now use for the 20 by 24 enlargement. So this is that one. This is the second test of this. You can see all these are really very close to the 5x7s. So the translation, oh, you can kind of see now. This was my first test. There's a line right here. So this is the difference between this exposure and this exposure. It's probably only 10-15% difference. Okay. So this is a little lighter, that's a little darker. There's the line. So that's the first test of this was. Here's another one. Okay. So these, now I can throw these away because I wanted to show them to you. How close you can get. This saves me a lot of paper because prior to this, if I didn't do the translation, I'd make my best guess and it might be off by 15 magenta. And then I make a full print, and the full print tells me, oh, I should cut some more. So now you're wasting a whole sheet to find out where you're burning. And so, you know, when you're paying $550 for a roll of paper, it really helps to find any way to save on that cost. Okay, so I threw that away. Now here's the spreadsheet. Let's see if I can zoom in on this. And this is easy for me to give to you because all I need is your email and I'll just send you the attachment. So here is a table. This is the yellow filtration for this particular paper, which is the Ilford RC paper. This is the filtration and the time for the fiber paper. Now, the neat thing about the spreadsheet is you can edit it. Obviously, if you're going to run your own test, you're going to edit it because you don't have my enlarger. My 30 yellow is not going to be the same as your 30 yellow, or you may not even be using 30. You might be using the number 1.5 filter that Ilford gives you or Kodak gives you. you just type over this, and matter of fact, you'll notice that here's 50, here's 35. In between, I put 43, so I interpolated this data. That's simply averaging it and putting in the difference in the time. So I've got more data here than there because I basically doubled my number of tests, so that whatever I do here, if I fall in between, I'll get a little bit closer. But this is your reference cell, so that if you're, in this case, 15 yellow is close to 13, so that's M11. So I just simply type in M11. Type in M11 here, and then I get my final experience. So now I just, because when you do this, every time I had to do this, I had to look for the grayscale and find out the word. It's too easy to make a mistake. So with this, you simply type that in. Now, this is basically how my brain works. This is how I wrote the other software we used to sell. Things that make sense to me, I would just tell my brother, this is how I do it, and he would figure out how to program it. Well, this is just a spreadsheet. But again, I have one where I switched it. So if I have a fiber-based print that I like, and I want to print on this paper, it'll do the opposite. All I have to do is put these numbers over here and these numbers over there. Likewise, if you have a different manufacturer that you use, you just simply, and you have these spreadsheets that you can go from this paper to that paper, from whatever paper you want, actually. I'm surprised I didn't do this earlier, because this is really good. It really saves me not just time, but cost in paper. It works really well. I shouldn't be surprised. But this is how my brain works, and this is how I programmed all the other software. Just telling my brother, because I'm not a programmer, I tell him. But this one, this is just spreadsheet, so it's easy to do. But this is the calculated, so you don't type that in. You just type that in, and you got it. Okay. So if you're interested, email me. I'm going to write this down. Let me see. I'll do it on this. Okay, timhguitar@gmail.com. I have the other one too, but I spelled photography wrong. If you type in Timh Photography, you have to spell photography wrong, because when I created that screen name, I typed too fast. But timhguitar@gmail. I think that's it. Yeah, and if you want the grayscale, which is really valuable, by the way, because I don't know if anyone else has got a 1.65 density range grayscale, self-addressed stamped envelope to me, and you should be able to find a meter. If you don't have a meter, you want to purchase a meter from me, we can talk about that. I don't have a whole bunch of those either, though. But the good thing about that is I can calibrate it so that your 2.20 would match my 2.20 if you get one of my light meters. Okay. I'm not in the business of selling stuff, but I just want to make it easier for those of you who are really truly interested in film photography and making fine prints. Anything I can do to help you along that way, that's what I'm trying to do here. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's it. I've been thinking about doing this, so it's done. Until I think of something else, I'll see you then, okay?